Welcome to Drinks in the Library, the only library where drinks aren't just allowed, they are required. I'm your librarian host, Gigi Howard, and each episode I'll be interviewing a guest about a much-loved book that we will be pairing with a drink for you to enjoy along with us or consider for your next book club meetup. As always, stay curious and support your local library. Hello, Libration Nation. Today, we're stepping into the surreal, tragic, darkly comedic world of Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse Five, a story about war, time travel, and what it means to say, "So it goes." My guest this week is Kat McClesse. Kat is an archaeologist with her MA in Bioarchaeology. She is also an amateur photographer. Slaughterhouse Five has been one of her favorite books since childhood and has sparked a lifelong interest in activism and human rights. She has a passion for horror and has driven her fiance insane with too many books. Those are his words. They live in Tuckahoe, Virginia with their 2 cats. For our drink this week, the protagonist of Slaughterhouse Five is Billy Pilgrim, a veteran of World War II who has become unstuck in time. An important moment in the story is where it's explained that a moment in time is like a bug caught in amber. And so we paired this week's episode with an amber old-fashioned. And so without further ado, enjoy this episode. So I don't remember. So we talked on email, and you said you wanted to do Slaughterhouse Five. And I love Vonnegut. In fact, that's one of the early series I connected with my now husband with when we were dating like 7,000 years ago. Cute. So I was like, yes, I haven't done Vonnegut yet.
My fiance, I forced him to read it when we started getting together. So
It's like, the true test of a good relationship.
Really it is, yeah.
So, who were you when you picked up Slaughterhouse Five?
I was in high school. I was like one of those really pretentious high school kids that was very nerdy. And I was constantly reading like fat books. And I never did well in school because I had ADHD. But nobody knew that. So
it's underdiagnosed in women.
In women, it's terrible. So I was always in lower classes. But my English teachers would be like, "Oh, you do so well in English. You're reading way above your level." And they'd actually like let me sneak across to the advanced English class, even though I wasn't in it, to sit in those classes. So I read Slaughterhouse Five probably when I was 15. I definitely, rereading it now, did not pick up on so many things. But it's still, I don't know, something about Vonnegut's writing and his humor like really grabbed me, you know? And I ended up taking the English AP test, and I just wrote all about Slaughterhouse Five because I was like, I was totally bullshitting. Is that okay to say?
Yeah.
I totally bullshitted the AP test. I was the only person that passed the AP test. Out of all of the students who were in there that had taken the AP English class. And I didn't take it and passed it because I just talked about Slaughterhouse Five the whole time. Yeah. And it's funny to me now because I'm like, I don't think I really got it. But now it's funny because I feel like this book, I've read it several times since then. I read it in college. I read it when I was in grad school, and now I'm reading it again. And I've gotten something out of it every single time, like something, some new dimension to it, which is cool because that's what it's about, you know? It's about like experiencing something deeper every time, I think.
I reread it actually for this episode, and it's short, and I pulled out like, this is our 20-year-old. What is it?
Pretty beat up as well.
Yours is like the red and yellow cover. I don't know. This one has like a big V and it's brown. It's fine.
Yeah, I think all their new Vonneguts, they all have this similar cover, which they look really good, but I don't know if they're the OG design. I know, and I've seen ones with Kurt Vonnegut's face on it, and he looks sort of like that on the back. I think that might be a self-portrait. Yeah, I think all of the doodles in the book and on the cover are all things he drew, and I think you can still buy, like, his kids sell his prints, so that's really cool. I really like his little doodles, and I have...
I love the doodles,
I have a tattoo I have a Kurt Vonnegut tattoo. I can't believe I hadn't mentioned that.
Oh.
I do. And it's not So It Goes. It's not yet. Maybe I'll get that one day. But it's, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind. Mm-hmm. And my friend actually has a doodle from this book. So I know that like getting his doodles is like a big tattoo thing for Vonnegut fans, which is cool.
I think it just is like an example of his quirkiness and his sense of humor, and which plays into his writing.
Oh, yeah.
It's beautiful.
Like hopefully this isn't inappropriate, but I'll be flipping through the book, and every time I'm reading it in public, every time, in high school, now, I always open the page, he's got like a big doodle of a woman's breast, and I'm like, okay, and then I like slam, I'm like, I'm not reading something dirty, I'm reading a really, like, intelligent author, but
I know, it's funny.
Every time.
Shout out to my dad, who listens to every episode of this.
Oh, no.
And I was like, I wonder if he's going to want to read it, and I got to the very last page, and it's like boobs.
Yeah, it's just a giant picture of boobs.
I don't know if I can recommend
Which I think
this.
was very, like, it really sums up he's like, I'm going to put this deep quote on this locket between this woman's breasts.
Yeah.
So it's like very Kurt Vonnegut's humor. So, yeah.
So I guess the next question is, what pulled you in when you were reading it in high school? Do you remember?
I don't even know. I think I must have gotten, in high school, I was taking government, and I was really into history, of course, and I was reading a lot of World War II books. I definitely am I'm an anti-war book fan, I guess I'll say.
Okay.
So I really like Tim O'Brien. I love Tim O'Brien. Oh my God. And that is one, if we talked about, I would cry because it's just so sad. But I think Tim O'Brien had to be so influenced by Kurt Vonnegut too. And I think that's kind of how I got to it, because I was reading Tim O'Brien, and then I read, I cannot remember the author's name, Unbroken. Hillenbrand, I think.
Hillenbrand, yeah.
And I really liked Unbroken. Although it's very different. It's very religious almost. But I think I was just reading all these World War II books because I was like taking a class on World War II.
Yeah.
And I bounced around to Slaughterhouse Five. And this one to me was just like so different. It had that sci-fi angle. And I actually am diagnosed with PTSD.
Okay.
So to read this book, I think in high school, that connected with me on like an unknown level, because I really didn't know that then. This has been like a recent discovery, but I think I connected to it really well because something that I had struggled with was like dissociation, and I think Vonnegut really details dissociation very well in the book, because Billy just seems to have it a lot. So, you know.
Yeah. Well, it starts off, he's unstuck in time. Yeah. And do you associate that with dissociation?
Yeah, I think so. And a lot of Kurt Vonnegut's descriptions, a lot of the book is about mundane things. Reading it again, like, I used to read it as a sci-fi, which Vonnegut really didn't want it marketed as a sci-fi.
Yeah.
But I think it does have a draw for sci-fi fans. But now reading it, I'm noticing, like, the more I read it, I'm like, okay, he has this alien abduction the night of his daughter's wedding. And anytime something big is happening, he goes out of, the space that he's in. And it's always like he's triggered by something, and he goes into this other world, which I think is a really good way of explaining it to people who don't have PTSD, you know? But he also, a scene that really struck me this time I was reading it is when Billy is home and he's like having his weeping fits. His doctor's like, sometimes he cries.
All the time.
And we don't know why. And we have no idea why when he saw these terrible things.
Yeah.
And he looks out the window and he sees these disabled men being used in a scam to sell the newspapers. And he's like, they were as unstuck in space as he was in time. I don't know. That really struck me. Vonnegut is kind of looking, like, this time I read it, I feel like we're in a similar headspace. Because, like, Vonnegut's looking around at the world, and he's like, look at all these little mundane things that are like, why are we doing this? Why is it like this? Not to be a downer.
No. Well, and, like, I think maybe we should make a framework for what happens in the book. Because it starts off, a lot of the book is about the bombing of Dresden, which happened towards the end of World War II, and Vonnegut was there. And that sort of is the catalyst from the story. Do you want to kind of guide the listener through that part?
Yeah. So basically, Vonnegut starts the book off, and he has this kind of, like an autobiographical chapter where he's kind of talking about how he wanted to write this war book for so long, but he just could not figure out how to do it. Every time he sat down to do it, he would have issues actually putting down his experience. Mm-hmm. And he knew that if he could, like, get it on paper, it seems like that it would be a good book. Like, it would do really well. Because that's what people wanted. And he goes to visit his friend, O'Hare, mm-hmm. who was a prisoner of war with him in World War II. And they're talking, and O'Hare's wife gets really mad at Kurt Vonnegut because he's trying to write this war book and come up with these stories with O'Hare. And O'Hare's wife, Mary, is like, you're going to write this book that glorifies war. And John Wayne's going to play a character in the movie. And children, like babies, like my babies, are going to want to go to war. And Vonnegut is like, no, there'll be no part for John Wayne in my book. And I'll even call it The Children's Crusade, which is the subtitle of the book.
Right.
And that really, I think, like, guides the whole book because over and over again, he's like, these are inexperienced children at this war, like the Germans, the Americans, the Russians, everybody. And so the book goes on to follow Billy Pilgrim, who is not Kurt Vonnegut, interestingly. And I think Vonnegut shades what happened to him by writing about Billy. Mm-hmm. And it really starts right off with Billy getting captured as a prisoner of war by the Germans and being taken close to Dresden. I don't know if he's really in Dresden.
Initially, yeah. They end up walking there, I think.
Yeah. And Billy comes unstuck in time, and he starts kind of, I don't even know the best way to put it. He just will be in a moment in Germany, and then he's 65, and then he will be living this very mundane life later in America as an optometrist, and he'll come back to Germany, and mm-hmm. he's like bouncing all around when you're reading it. And so you're experiencing like the story in a very disjointed way.
Yeah.
So yeah. But
yeah,
it's so hard to.
And there's aliens.
There's aliens. I didn't even mention the aliens, but the aliens aren't why he's bouncing around in time. Like that's not connected, which is a lot.
Yeah, he talks a lot about the bombing of Dresden, which sounds talking about anti-war things.
Yeah,
we are Americans. And the World War II is often like, oh, the Allies won, and mm-hmm. it was a justified war. But unfortunately, the bombing of Dresden now is, a lot of people say, was unnecessary, and a lot of people died.
Yeah.
Civilians. And so I think that's what Vonnegut was talking about. And it was
and
traumatic, PTSD.
Oh, yeah. And later in interviews, so apparently a lot of Holocaust deniers have tried to use his experiences in Dresden as, another bad thing happened, so let's discredit this other horrible thing that happened. Like, and Vonnegut absolutely was not a Holocaust denier, but I think he hated it when people did that. But, you know, as a prisoner of war, they made him clean up after the bombing, and he mm-hmm. was like, the people that he couldn't identify their bodies, he was like, this could have been me, like this could have been anyone, mm-hmm. and that the killing itself, I think in his mind, really was bigger than the war. It was, we're all people. Mm. We're all just killing each other. And a common theme in anti-war books, when you're experiencing that kind of thing, which I can't speak to, obviously, but is they're just like the senselessness of the killing, you know, mm-hmm. and like how I think a lot of these anti-war authors are like, what we saw should never be done. And you can see how it really impacted him for the rest of his life. He was an activist, you know?
Yeah,
so
he definitely was an activist, yeah. I guess another quick kind of question is, we've talked about Billy Pilgrim, and Kurt Vonnegut's kind of like the narrator. What are some of the other characters that we meet?
Oh boy, there's so many very colorful characters. Yeah. Actually, I have the graphic novel.
Yes. Okay. So tell me about the graphic novel a little bit, because I have not read it.
The graphic novel actually does a really good job of like outlining all the characters. Okay. And it also gives you a very handy timeline of Billy's life.
Oh.
That you can flip back and forth to, which I really like.
Beautiful.
So the graphic novel definitely reads as you should read the book with it, because a lot of it is just like spoken parts and then illustrations, and the illustrations are beautiful. Mm-hmm. But I think Vonnegut gives you so much in his like prose between the spoken parts as well. Like mm-hmm. most of the book is not dialogue, you know?
Yeah.
So he gives a supporting cast of characters, and he gives Roland Weary, who Billy kind of meets him right in the beginning of the book when he's just wandering on the German front mm-hmm. because his whole group was killed.
Yeah.
Both of them, I guess.
Yeah.
And he just runs into Roland Weary and a couple of other soldiers, and Roland is kind of like, he's very self-important a little bit, I guess, mm-hmm. and he definitely gives you like I mean, he's like a young boy who's been sent off to this war, and he has these like war hero delusions. And the whole time they're going, he really allies himself with these 2 other soldiers who are like professional soldiers who don't want anything to do with him or Billy. And he's like, we're the 3 Musketeers, and we're saving Billy's life, dragging him around. Yeah. And they also see Roland as like, we gotta cut this deadweight loose. Like, and so they actually, in the graphic novel, they say that Roland is stupid, mean, unpopular, unhappy 18-year-old obsessed with glory. Oh. Which I think is kind of mean, because he does die in a lot of the deaths in the book are very pathetic. Not to, that's not to belittle the death. Yeah. It's sad, but Vonnegut definitely doesn't shy away from people shouldn't be dying this way, So Roland dies. Kilgore Trout is in this book.
The author, yeah. So, and he also plays a role in other Vonnegut books. Yeah.
Which I really like Kilgore Trout as a character. I think he's like a little self-insert, but he's interesting in Slaughterhouse Five because he's definitely not Kurt Vonnegut. Because throughout the book, Kurt Vonnegut will be like, that was me. Like, Billy will be doing something and he'll just pass some random guy. And Kurt Vonnegut will be like, that guy was me. Which I always think is very funny. But Valencia, his wife, who he really doesn't talk too much about, honestly. Valencia is just like kind of a side character.
Yeah, he almost like marries her by accident.
Yeah, it's kind of just like that's the thing to do, like, but she really at different points is not like a super, prominent character in the book.
Yeah.
I do like, and his daughter's not even on the supporting cast page, but one of my favorite characters is Billy's daughter, Barbara. Yeah. I think Barbara's so funny. And she's like, when Billy comes back from the war, I feel like this is an important thing to mention that's kind of offhand in the book too. Billy comes back from the war and he lives this whole like normal life. Like, he's an optometrist. He has a mental breakdown in college, and he goes to the mental ward, and that's where he meets Kilgore Trout. And Kilgore Trout has this great line where he, like, tells the psychiatrist, you need to come up with better lies or people are not going to want to live anymore, which I think is, oh, my God. As a person with mental illness, I'm like, oh, relatable. I love Kilgore Trout. But, so Billy has this, like, very normal life. And then one day he goes to this optometry meeting and gets in a plane crash.
That's right.
Which is like not even a big deal in the book. Yeah, they're like, yeah, he was in a plane crash and he was the only one who survived. And then after he had this head trauma, he started talking about aliens. But Vonnegut really frames it as like, this was not the first time that he experienced the aliens. To his daughter, Barbara, she's like, why are you talking about aliens now? You don't think this has anything to do with the plane crash? And Vonnegut talks about, like, all this experience, all the responsibility that Barbara has because her mom passed away. And she's dealing with her dad going on national news talking about aliens. He says some line where he's like, she's a insufferable flibberty-gibbet or something like that. And I really like his daughter. I wish he did focus more on her.
Yeah, I mean, you have to see it from her point of view. It's like all of a sudden your dad is, like, from your perspective, losing it. Yeah. And, like, who's to say, is this all in Billy Pilgrim's mind? Is this real?
Yeah. And the book really never gives us, like, an answer to that. I feel like it's really up to the reader to decide, like, was Billy unstuck in time being abducted by these aliens? Or did Billy have a head injury and have, like, serious PTSD? Yeah. Which I have my opinion on. Okay. But, I kind of think it's, like, no fun to just straight up be like, oh, yeah, he's mentally ill. Like, yeah. And I think that's not the point. Right. Like, yeah.
Exactly. So, any other characters we want to look at?
So we have the Tralfamadorians.
Okay, yes. Okay.
I think they're so funny. Kurt Vonnegut straight up like, yeah, they're shaped like a plunger with like a little hand on top. And they're not really good or bad. They definitely have some really like interesting views on the world,
Yeah. So the Tralfamadorians, the night of Barbara's wedding, they abduct Billy and they take him to their planet to basically be like an animal in the zoo, in their zoo, right?
Yeah. So he goes to the human zoo on Tralfamador, and they put him there with Montana Wildhack, who is a movie star, I guess.
A beautiful movie star, yeah.
And it's funny because it's like Billy when they abduct him, he's like, why me? And they say the whole famous line, there is no why. Like, that's a very Earthling thing to say. But it's so funny to me that they stick him with this movie star. 'Cause she's, like, beautiful and, like, I don't know. He's just, like, some guy. He's some optometrist. They, I guess, have this little love affair. Like, he's, like...
In the zoo.
Yeah, in the zoo. It's like, in time, Montana came to love and trust Billy Pilgrim. He did not touch her until she made it clear that she wanted him to. After she'd been on Tralfamadore for what would have been an Earthling week, she asked him shyly if he wouldn't sleep with her, which he did, which was heavenly. So he's just going back and forth between being with Montana in this human zoo to being with his wife in their house in Ilium, New York. And they're talking about, like, the oil burner man coming and, like, maintaining the stove or something.
Between the pages.
So it's just very, it's crazy and then it's very mundane.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and to me, it's sort of how the Tremalfadorians explain how time works, because they talk about how when they see a dead body, that's the famous phrase. Every time someone dies, they say, and so it goes.
Yeah.
And so it goes, because the Tremalfadorians were like, when we see a dead body, we see someone that's, they almost describe it as like being asleep, but there's plenty of other moments in time where that person is awake, and so it doesn't really matter that you're dead.
Yeah, they're kind of like, oh, their whole life is just happening all at once.
Right.
So when I look at a dead person, I'm seeing all the beautiful and sad moments of their life. So I want that at my funeral. Like, I want them to say that, because they're like, oh, you shouldn't grieve these people because they had all these beautiful moments.
Yeah.
But the book at the same time is kind of about grief. He's got this, like, really interesting dual philosophy here where he's like, oh, all these, like, little moments of mundaneness and sadness and, like, wonderfulness come together to make this one beautiful life. But then he is grieving all these moments that these people are dying senselessly, you know?
Yeah.
It's like an uplifting book, and it's fantastical, but it's also can be very sad and depressing underneath, which this book for me is the book I think that, like, encapsulates Vonnegut as a person the best. Because he was, like, this person with this very quick wit and, like, kind of wry sense of humor, like, so funny. But he also just had this other side to him, I think, that was permanently changed by what he went through here. So,
Yeah. And going back to what we were talking about, the Tremalfadorians, I wanted to call out our drink real quick.
Oh, yeah.
And it's from, so I did Amber Old Fashioned because, once again, Billy Pilgrim is unstuck in time. So I'm just going to read the quote.
Yeah.
And this is him talking to the
Tralfamadorian.
I'm never going to get it right.
I don't know how you say it, honestly. Like
the Tremalfadorians, maybe. Yeah. Okay. Have you ever seen bugs trapped in amber? Yes. Billy, in fact, had a paperweight in his office, which was a blob of polished amber with 3 ladybugs embedded in it. Well, here we are, Mr. Pilgrim, trapped in the amber of this moment. There is no why. So, anyhow, I just started, like, looking up drinks with the word amber in the name. So this is an amber old fashioned.
We're trapped in the moment.
We're trapped in the moment, and it's very...
It's really good.
Yeah, and it's got the amber. I think the amber mostly comes from, what is it, the bitters. It's very red to go with the whiskey. But this one also has peach in it, and it has a little bit of rum.
Yeah, it's very, like, it's sweet and citrusy. I really like it. I'm going to have to get the recipe, actually.
You got it.
It's so good.
To me, when I was rereading it, I was struck by, I think the impact this book has had on me is the aspect of time. Because I think about that all the time. You know, when you lose someone and it's heartbreaking, but you have to realize all of those moments that you've had always exist.
Oh, you're going to make me tear up.
I know. Sorry.
Yeah. It is. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful idea.
Yeah. But it's like the love you make is equal to the love you take. Yeah. And that's the way time works. So I guess I've thought about that a lot over the years. And I think I got the idea from this book like 20 years ago when I read it.
I could definitely see that because I think he wrote this like 20 or 25 years after he was even there. That might not be right. But I'm not sure.
I think it came out in 69. So, yeah, that would have been about right.
I think he was like...
45 to 69 would have been 25, 24.
He was like, oh, I wanted to write this for so long. And there's actually another book about him trying to write it called The Children's Crusade. I cannot remember the author's name. But I've been trying to get my hands on that from the library. And it's like about him writing the book.
Okay.
Which is like meta on meta on meta, because the book's kind of meta in itself. I think it's so funny how in the very beginning he's like, oh, I really tried to remember things, but I couldn't remember anything. He had these like blank spots. But then when he describes Billy walking in the snow or the things he saw in the camp, they're described so well. You're like, no one could write this unless they'd been there and seen it themselves.
Yeah.
And so his idea of time is definitely really interesting, because I think a common thing for people with PTSD is not remembering big swaths of your life or important events.
Okay.
Because your brain just protects you from remembering those things.
Okay.
But then you have these like details, like the sense memory is so intense. And so I think he really like nails it in this book. Like if you were reading it and didn't have PTSD, I think you could almost parse out like what it would be like to have it. But I don't know, like his sense of time is just so interesting, because even characters that he's like, oh, they died then, he really, like, even Roland Weary, who's just an exasperating character, he gives him like a dignity when he dies, and you're sad about it. And like one character I don't think I mentioned is Derby, the teacher.
Yes.
I forget what his first name is.
He's like the true hero of the book.
Yeah, he really is. He's the John Wayne. Like, if there was a John Wayne, it'd be him. But I cannot remember his full name. But there's two Derbys. There's like him and his son.
Right.
And he talks about how Derby Sr. doesn't make it through the war, but he's like a teacher and he is a big reader. He like talks about him reading while they're at the prisoner of war camp. And he's like this really fit guy who the Germans kind of come up to Billy and they're like, why would they send you here? Like, you're so scrawny and like you're nothing. And then Derby's kind of like the guy you'd expect, like the action hero. And Derby also has a senseless death. But there's like kind of this really sweet scene where Derby is like holding Roland Weary as he passes away.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just, you're reading it and you're like, oh, Roland's so annoying. He's got all these delusions of grandeur. But then when he dies, he's just a boy again, you know? Like, it's so sad. And it really hammers home that we were all just children, you know?
Yeah, and the senselessness of it all.
Yeah.
I did want to ask a little bit, since you brought it up, is your interest or passion for anti-war sentiment. I mean, do you want to speak to that a little bit? You don't have to.
Yeah, I don't want to get your podcast in trouble. I think reading it now has been, I don't know, it's opened so many more thoughts to me with all the things that go on in the world.
Yeah.
And I think Vonnegut is what has made me like an anti-war person. Because like really reading the book and reading Tim O'Brien too, they both are just kind of like, oh, this is politicians who go at war with each other. It's not people. And they send children to go fight each other, you know? And Vonnegut does talk about how there were 14-year-olds there and he was only 18, you know? Like he was a child. And so it just like breaks my heart to read any of these books where it's just these kids who go out there with they don't have good concepts of what it actually is going to be.
Yeah.
And I think especially as Americans, like we have not had war on our soil like many other countries have in a very long time. Even Pearl Harbor, it wasn't, you know, like a widespread, it was still terrible, but not like a widespread war. And I think a lot of us who haven't been in it just cannot even begin to understand why it happens or what it's like or how truly terrible it is. And it just goes back to like why books are important. I mean, it's people telling their experiences that you haven't had and you being able to relate to those experiences and learn something that you will maybe hopefully never experience. So this is like a really random book to bring up during a Kurt Vonnegut conversation. But I don't know if you've ever read like I Am Malala.
I haven't read it yet. No.
You should read it. It's really good. Okay. But that I read around the same time as Slaughterhouse Five. And I think it's another really good anti-war example. I mean, it's by a young girl.
Right.
She's a huge anti-war activist right now. But it is like our way of life is so different than what her life has been like and experienced. And I would never know those things if it weren't for that book. And I, you know, think I grew up being vehemently like against it because I was like, reading about her experiences.
And, like, I mean, you can't talk about Kurt Vonnegut. You can't talk about this book without talking about anti-war, because I think once you get down to the crux of it.
Yeah. It's like a keystone of the whole genre. Like, I feel like a lot of anti-war books are really influenced by this book. Probably not like, your World War I ones, like All Quiet on the Western Front, but which I think some people would be like, that's not an anti-war book. But is it? Like, I think a lot of war books are just anti-war books. Like,
yeah. Well, if you have the perspective of being there and you see people die, and
it's terrible.
It is. It's horrible. Yeah.
And Vonnegut even has, like, Billy Pilgrim's such an interesting character because the whole time he's there, it's terrible. He goes through so many terrible things and just, like, terrible, pathetic things. The whole time he's there, he's like, just leave me. I'll die. Just leave me. Like, several times. It's like, we're laughing because it's funny.
Well, we're laughing. It's also, like, I think there's humor in Vonnegut tells these horrible stories, but he can still see the humor in it. And that's why we laugh.
He's so brilliant. But there's times where Billy's, like, walking behind the German front, and he's like, just leave me here. I'll just die. And for some reason, it's just so funny. But the whole time he's there, he's just miserable. And, like, he doesn't do anything heroic. He's just a boy that's being, like, pushed around by everybody.
Yeah.
And even at one point, like, to add insult to injury, they walk into the prisoner of war camp. And the Germans are like, we'll give all the Americans coats. And they give him this, like, tiny coat. And he's like, I think it had, like, a dead animal frozen to it. And it was, like, a fur collar on the coat. And then at one point, he walks into the British barracks at the prisoner of war camp.
Yes.
And his coat catches on fire.
Hang on. Can you talk about the British barracks? Because, talk about funny.
Yeah. I think the funny thing about it is it's like the book is so bleak at this point. Like, it's so upsetting and bleak. And just, like, these boys are being put through terrible things. And then the Germans take them to the barracks where all the British prisoner of wars are. And they've been there, I guess, for months. And, like, they come out singing. And they're, like, singing. They sing every day. And they're, like, super buff because they just work out all the time, I guess. Yeah. And they're like, oh, there was this incident with the Red Cross where the Red Cross accidentally sent them, like, a ton of food.
So there was, like, some kind of bookkeeping accident at the Red Cross. So, like, instead of sending them, like, 5,000 rations of food, they send, like, 10 times that. So, like, they've been hiding, like, coffee, cigarettes, sugar,
chocolate.
They have everything. Yeah. And the Germans are just like, classic British. They're so strong. Like,
they're having a great time. And I mean, they're not having a great time, but like, they're doing well in the circumstances.
They put on the play Cinderella.
Yeah, they do. And they have a feast for them, and they make my favorite part is they make them little goodie bags. And the goodie bags have, like, a pencil, a cigarette, a comb.
Yeah.
And then Kurt Vonnegut, very funny, like, Billy's coat, he goes up against this, like, warm stove in the British barracks, and his coat catches on fire.
Yeah.
And the British are like, oh, my God, your coat's on fire. The Germans have played a prank on you by giving you this stupid coat. And then Vonnegut, of course, brings the mood down by being like, oh, yeah, and they gave them these candles and soap, and the candles and soap were made from the Jews' fat.
Yeah.
And he's like, no one knew this, so it goes.
Yeah.
And then we're right back to the British soldiers are putting on Cinderella, and Billy's laughing his head off at Cinderella. And it's just like this, it's like surreal, you know?
Right.
It's crazy.
But probably it happened. I mean, Vonnegut kind of sets out the beginning. He said, all of this happened.
Yeah. Something I think about a lot with this book is how much of it is autobiographical. Like, I think that is something really mysterious to me, because a lot of it's written like you had to be there, you know, to know these details of things that happened. Because I feel like it's just something the mind would not come up with.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Vonnegut kind of was very mysterious about, like, what happened to him in the war. And it's like, did this happen? Was this a real person? Roland Weary has this whole, like, vengeance plot. Subplot where he tells another guy to kill Billy or something because he sees it as it's Billy's fault that he's dead.
Yeah, they all hate Billy.
Everyone hates Billy. It's so sad.
Yeah.
Like, because at one point they're in this, like, train car going to the prisoner of war camp, and they won't let Billy sit down to sleep because he's, like, kicking everyone in his sleep. And they're just like, get away from me.
Yeah.
It's so sad because it's like, even in the most pitiful situation where everyone's so miserable, they still don't like Billy.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, I feel so bad for him.
I felt for him, and they were talking about him sleeping standing up in a train car, and I was like, that sounds like literal hell for me. Yeah.
And like in the book, it's kind of played off as like funny. But in the graphic novel, it's like really bleak.
Who is the author of the graphic novel?
The author of the graphic novel is Ryan North and Albert Montes.
Okay.
It's really good. I got it at Barnes & Noble. It's not too expensive. It definitely has some quotes and things from Vonnegut that are post-writing, like some newer stuff. And I mean, the illustrations are just like absolutely gorgeous, but it has a lot of like additional things that I don't think were included in the original book. I definitely don't want to recommend it to people who haven't read the book because I think there's a lot in the actual prose that you'd be missing.
Yeah.
Like his descriptions of things are just so good and creative. Like he really looked at the world in a different way, I feel like. But the graphic novel is really good as far as like parsing out what actually happens.
Yeah.
Because the book does such a good job of kind of disorienting you, which is on purpose. I feel like the graphic novel almost cuts away all this extra stuff and is like, here's the plot, you know?
Yeah.
I think it'd be good for teens.
Okay.
If they can handle it.
Yeah, well, you read it as a teen.
Yeah, I read it as a teen, but I was very pretentious. I probably shouldn't have read it. Like, I was like reading it like, la, 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 I don't understand what the heck he's talking about. Like, you know, but...
I mean, I think it has multiple levels and multiple layers, and there's definitely, you know, it's one of those ones you can definitely come back to.
And it's like, I don't know if anybody has had to read it in high school. I definitely didn't have it as like assigned material, because it's pretty critical of the Americans.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if our high school teachers would want us having that. But I don't know if it's been on a banned books list, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, I'm sure it has.
Because it's very critical of like, it's anti-war in a way that's like, hey, we did bad stuff too.
Right.
Like, let's not forget this. And I think Vonnegut also, his whole life was very critical of any act of war that we did. He was very like, let's think about everything we do because like the cost of human life is not worth it.
Yeah.
So.
And I think you can say that, and you can say, my concern is for these people that we're sending, and my concern is for the soldiers, and my concern is for these young people. And when we say you're anti-war, sometimes people are like, oh, you don't support our troops. I'm like, no.
No, I don't want our troops to go through this. Yeah.
I very much support the troops. It can be two things. It doesn't have to be one thing or another thing. And I think the book's
very multifaceted in that way, too. It's like, it doesn't speak... I don't think it really speaks at all on the actual morality of World War II and, like, the Allies versus the Axis. Like, he doesn't... Obviously, he's condemning the Germans, but he's not trying to, like, tell a story about, oh, we were in the right and they were the wrong and it was black and white. He's trying to tell a story of, we're all human beings and this is the experience that they're having and this is the experience that we're having. And... it's very interesting. It's just like another facet of World War II, you know? Yeah. I think the important thing that readers need to take away from it is it's not really about the war itself. It's about his experiences in the war. It's very small. Like, it's very individual. What it did to him and how we can look at every person that was there was affected in this way. Like, every one of them walked away seeing horrible things that I just think people shouldn't see. And I think that's mostly what Vonnegut was trying to say. And, like, later in life, he talks about Billy being the president of the Lions Club and his son being a Green Beret in Vietnam. And they do talk about Vietnam kind of, like, Vietnam's very in the peripheral in this book. Because it was happening when he released it. And Billy is very different from Vonnegut in that Vonnegut is, like, telling his children, you are not to participate in this. You're not to be in the military, this and that. And Billy's son is a Green Beret, and he's in Vietnam. And at one point, the Lions Club is having a meeting talking about bombing. And there's, like, a guy in the Lions Club who's like, I think we should just bomb them to smithereens. And Billy, just as the president of the Lions Club, he has no opinion on it. He even says, like, with all of his experience with bombings and how terrible it is, Billy doesn't say anything against it. And I think that's really telling, too, because it's kind of like, you know, if everyone had felt the way Kurt Vonnegut had felt, maybe we wouldn't have had these other things happen. I think Vonnegut really worked through things and actually was able to like take a step back and see the forest for the trees. And I think he's kind of outlining what some people were like some veterans and Billy, because, you know, Billy is almost so traumatized from this that like he can't even have an opinion on it. Like he's just like, yeah, I'm going through life. I don't really care about life too much. And then when someone is talking about something that he has a really valuable opinion for, he's just kind of there.
Yeah.
And I think it's really telling to how that was, you know, formed him as a child into a man later.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. So I guess you've done such a good job of like walking us through everything. I'm on my last question, which is, who would you recommend this book for?
Oh my gosh, I want to say everybody, but it's definitely not going to be for everybody. Yeah. I don't think it's a hard book to read.
No.
But it is very, like, you have to go with it. Like, you have to trust him and just go with the process, because it is like, oh, we're in World War II. Now we're 62 and we're optometrists.
Right.
Now we're on an alien planet. Now we're on a spaceship. And it's like kind of all over the place. I think that's what makes it really interesting. And I think high schoolers can obviously read it, because I was a high schooler. I think college or adulthood is like probably the peak like time, like early young adulthood is the peak time to read this, because Vonnegut, I think, was trying to get it into college students' hands, like writing it during Vietnam, during the time he was writing it. Yeah, and I think especially with like the way the world is right now, there's so much war, so much conflict all over the world. And I think that it's just a good time to read some Kurt Vonnegut. I don't know. Like, he had a lot of really valuable things to say. And he's very knowledgeable on anti-war and like current events at the time that he was alive, and had a lot of really good opinions. So, yeah.
I appreciate his perspective, too, as, like, someone that experienced all these things and really thought about it. But anyway, this has been so lovely to chat with you today and enjoy the Amber Old Fashioned.
Yes, so good.
We're Bugs and Amber in this moment, and this moment will always exist. And it always has existed.
I know we kind of like, this kind of happened so randomly. So it's really fun that we got to talk about it.
Yeah, I know. It's been great. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Here we go. Push this. Thank you for spending some time with me and my guest for an episode of Drinks in the Library. For more information about the show, you can find us on Instagram at Drinks in the Library, on the World Wide Web, drinksinthelibrary.com, or shoot me an email at drinkspod@gmail.com. Until next time, cheers.